So let's say we're going to take out the bank in Peckham High Street, right? Now you get the saw knobs and the balaclavas.
Okay.
You get
the tuning forks and the electrical watches were kind of in between once from the quartz crisis and then when we started doing mechanical watch. So bad time, but anyway, it doesn't really matter.
I always find it fascinating that there isn't enough love done to a quartz movement, and there's ways to decorate it so that you feel like it's worth the money that you're doing it. And I've only heard of one brand doing this.
Welcome to episode 3, back by popular demand, Touch My Clock, with Elliot, Max, and Jason. Okay, what have we got on our wrists, Max?
Awesome. So for today's conversation, I wanted to bring something that I was going to talk about later. And so this is a piece that actually Elliot gave me a long time ago. It's called the Trafalgar. It's a quartz watch that was made in Germany. And there's something about it that's very much like the PRX, if you know the PRX. And I always love wearing this watch because it makes me feel like, ooh, I've got a PRX on, but I don't really have a PRX on. And it starts a bit of conversations. And I've had a couple of times where I've talked to people with the PRX on, wearing this, and they always thought I had one of them. And then there was a bit of a strange feeling and they couldn't understand it. And so it created a conversation. I think this is a really cool quartz watch. And I think, Elliot, you got it for £30?
Something like that. That's quite the fun thing of getting these old quartz watches, is they'll be accurate and they're really cheap.
Really cheap.
It's quite fun.
Cool.
I love that metal block and that wonderful, sort of almost transparent colour. He changes with the light, which I think is stunning. Look at that quarter.
I think it has 4...
Really cute little watch. Very cool.
Elliot, what's on your wrist?
So, again, with the amazing topic of today, so I'm wearing a tuning fork watch, which is the Omega F300 Hertz, which is pretty beautiful. My brother gave me this. Oh, I'm doing the wrong thing. So, this is a really beautiful watch. My brother gave this to me because I tempted him to give it to me.
Wow.
I loved it so much. Really nice gold, and I'll explain later how the movement works, kind of.
Very
if I
cool.
understand it. And
So,
Jason.
look, I've got my Fairer. Just love this watch. Fairer, of course, comes from the word seafarer, and it means sort of the adventurer out there in the wild. And this is just a beautiful watch. Well, the way it's made. We're just there. There it is, up there.
So imagine
all
you're
the people. And look, you can see that wonderful sort of engraved automatic movement there, which I think is stunning. I think Fairer did a little job. I do love the two-tone blue on the outside, little red hand. They call this a three-hand automatic, which is great marketing because I think majority of watches have got three hands. But you'd see lovely little sort of stainless steel case and that little brass on the back there. I think that's just a really gorgeous watch, and I've kind of fallen back in love with it. I put this little ostrich blue strap on, and I just think that is a stunning piece. It's got a Jouy Perret Swiss movement. It's got a mammoth 68 hours on that, which I think is just absolutely incredible. And it also has a hacking piece. Now, hacking piece is really quite fascinating. That's when you pull out the crown and the second hand stops. So what's the point of that, you say? Well, look, if you wanted to really synchronize your watches, that's really good. It means you can do a number of watches at the same time. So it's really is a good movement, and Fairer have that on a number of their watches. So let's say we're going to take out the bank in Peckham High Street, all right? Now you get the saw knobs and the balaclavas.
Okay.
You get...
I mean, there's wristwatch check, and then there's let me tell you a story.
Let me be a brand ambassador and then do that.
But going back to the very basics, we just talked about a quartz, we talked about tuning fork, we talked about a mechanical piece. What does it all mean? So this episode, although we're going to be talking about maybe some subjects that you might have heard of before and you might not have heard of before, I think it's good to just cover the basics. So today we're going to be talking about what's the difference between a mechanical timepiece, a quartz timepiece, and then the intricacies and the little details that you get between them, such as tuning forks, electronic watches. What do they all really mean? So maybe let's start with a mechanical piece. What is a mechanical piece, Jason? You're wearing one. What does it mean?
Okay, so look, a mechanical piece is really what the watch industry really started off with. In simple terms, there's one spring, and that spring just gets tightened and it releases its energy all the way. And you tighten the string by winding the watch. That gives it the power. And then you've got the balance. And the balance is what oscillates at a certain movement and keeps perfect time. And that just sits really just above the mainspring and just turns that really sort of nice little sound. And on top of that is a little regulator, almost like a T-bar. There's a little jewel on either side, and that just rocks back and forth. Tick-tock, tick-tock, tick-tock. And there's a little clog underneath, and basically just by doing it, you just move those clogs around.
And then after that, and now actually one complete circle is around 5 seconds. Now, actually, once you've done that, and that's moved around 5 seconds, there's something that you now call a train, woo-woo, which is lots and lots of wonderful cogs, and which just keep moving together to turn the hands and to turn the second hands. So I think it's fascinating. And I guess what's quite interesting is there's a huge debate between quartz and automatic. But the wonderful thing about automatic, why we're so impressed with it, is just because there's just so much ingenuity and there's so much in terms of that technical, and there's hundreds of movements in there. And then the next step is from manuals, which we got how is an automatic, and I think you can see things we talked about it just before. But if we look at, he's trying to get his watch off. If we look at the back, there's that just little metal part there that just spins around, and as that spins around, that just keeps continually winding the spring. So as long as you're wearing it, it will just wind whilst it's on your wrist. And then there came the quartz crisis. Tell us about the crisis.
Yeah. So the quartz crisis came. Actually, interestingly enough, quartz clocks came from the 1920s, 1930s. There were some examples in the US, and some examples then followed in Japan. But quartz was a really pivotal moment in the history of watchmaking and wristwatches for the following reason. So, in 1969, Seiko, a brand that you might have heard of from Japan, created the first miniaturized version of these massive quartz clocks, and it just became a quartz timepiece. So this was the Seiko Astron Quartz, and when this happened, it kind of flipped the entire industry on its head. Why would you spend so much money having every single element and cog hand polished, handmade, fabricated, when you could just basically get a piece of mineral inside it that's wrapped around a coil that will basically vibrate at something like 32,000 times a second, and then it gives you absolute precision. At the time, it was believed that horology was the mastery of precision. That's why Abraham Louis Breguet worked on things like a tourbillon, where you'd have to spend hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pounds to get something that would slightly tweak it, so it's slightly better. But once the quartz arrived, it made everything a little bit redundant. There was no point.
More accurate than most of the watches that were available that day.
100%. That's
Without a doubt, yeah.
yeah. And then, what was quite interesting actually was this switch. So, when the quartz watch was introduced, it killed off a lot of the Swiss industry. A lot of brands had died off, and it was called the quartz crisis at the time in the 1970s. And what happened was there was a bit of a renewal in Swiss watchmaking and quartz, and this was especially with Nicolas Hayek. So Nicolas Hayek was the CEO of Swatch, and I believe still is. And what he did was he looked at it and he said, guys, what we need to do is we need to embrace quartz as much as we can. And now there's no question about it. If I talk about Swatch, it's almost synonymous with the word quartz. And certain brands, such as Blancpain, decided we are not going to touch quartz ever, ever, ever. However, a lot of brands have slightly decided, you know what, we're going to be experimental. And that's where you can find some cool models from Omega to Rolex, all of these kind of big Swiss houses that decided to use quartz in their everyday pieces. Mm-hmm.
So, well, sometimes you get this romance around the automatic movements that you don't have with a quartz. But I think the quartz is a quintessential part of anyone's watch collection. When you open your watch box, unless you've got them into some expensive winder, you open your watch box. It's really good to have one watch that's actually tailing the time. You can just pull it out and go, oh look, it's 3:15, without trying to check to your phone or the rest of it. So I think a few quartz watches in a broad collection is really useful.
Yeah, I mean, it is. You need the quartz watches in one, and that's when you open the box, and that's how you can set the time. So you'd think, oh, mechanical is the greatest, and then none of them are right on time.
So you're going to tell us about some weird stuff.
Some weird stuff. So actually, the tuning forks and the electrical watches were kind of in between ones from the quartz crisis, and then when we started doing mechanical watches. So bad time, but anyway, it doesn't really matter. So the tuning fork got a great picture here. I'm not going to be the best at explaining this, but I'm going to do my best. So what you can see here is actually the fork itself. And that's why this has got the name too. So what actually happens is you've got basically two magnets at the top of the tuning fork. And you've got about coils here, which actually is about the third of a human hair size. So it's very, very thin. And they actually wrap around so many times, you've got about 80 meters of coil per cell in that part. And what they do is basically they create a magnetic field which then vibrates the tuning fork at about 320 times per second. And it self-regulates itself. So if it starts, the magnetism goes a bit higher or too lower, it'll itself push itself and put less power or more power to be able to keep that. It is powered by a battery, of course. So that's just the cell that you have there. So from there, with the setting 320 times per second, it's then delivered to a small little shaft wheel, which has 320 gears, which you actually cannot see it from the naked eye. And if you touch it from the sides, it will break, just by touch. These were how sensitive these were. So these are really, really popular with the Accutrons, and a couple of companies did them, for example, with the Omega, from what we talked about before. This had a tuning fork movement. Is another picture here. The only problem with these were very expensive to manufacture and to maintain. They're really sensitive and can break really quickly. So these were, I would say, short-lasted in the lives that they had. But really beautiful watches to have, and there's a nice little hum you get from of the beat of it.
Didn't Belova get some sort of fame and credit for being one of the watches with the Accutron? Heading to the moon. Oh, that Belova. Oh, wow. There you go. That's the one.
They were the ones who pioneered this.
Very cool.
But also on this term, in between these, there are also these hybrids. People might know them, and they're electrical watches. So this came before the Quartz crisis, and I believe around the same time as the tuning fork movements. And actually, all it does is it just takes the power from a battery instead of the mainspring. So I have one example of a watch here. So this one basically does that. You have the cell at the back of the watch.
Ooh, let's put it in the middle. let's
So,
try.
but it basically works exactly like a mechanical watch in all of its movements. But these, again, the idea is cool. It's cool that the power comes from a battery, except it's also as inaccurate as a mechanical watch. So,
Oh, really?
I mean, all the timekeeping is from the mainspring anyway, from the balance wheel. Sorry. So anyway, yeah, but that's interesting. So there you go.
Very cool. So anyway, back to Peckham High Street and and the rationale for the hacking second, which is to make sure that all of the watches can be set at the same time to be accurate.
True. You really wanted to finish your point.
What's the point? But okay, so I didn't show this image, but this is just a typical configuration of a Quartz watch. So you've got your battery here, you've got your coil that goes around here, and then the most important part is your quartz crystal that sits here. Now, there's something that I've seen this week that I was quite impressed by, and I'll put a picture up on the screen, and it's FP Journe did a quartz watch, and there was something really cool about it where you would wear the quartz watch, and then as soon as you stop wearing it for a certain period of time, it stops, the battery is saved, and then when you wear it back again, it continues, but it continues back to where you wore it. So you basically have 25 years plus of a quartz watch, but instead of like the maybe 3-4 years that you get from a quartz watch. And the way that they did this is, I think there's an opportunity for the watch industry to start finishing up watches with the same level of love that you would see in mechanical pieces, and the same amount of love that...
We have a new guest.
We have a new
guest for the podcast.
If you see a dog running around the room, this is Maya. Maya is a chief horologist, and essentially she's the one that...
Born watchmaker.
Yeah, she's the one that has the most experience in all of this.
Barking mad.
Barking mad. But yeah, I don't know. Like, I always find it fascinating that like there isn't enough love done to a quartz movement, and there's ways to decorate it so that you feel like it's worth the money that you're doing it. And I've only heard of one brand doing this.
They never make them look nice, to be honest.
Yeah.
It's a very boring one. There's only some brands like electricians that make it kind of look like really nice. But also there are some hybrids that we didn't talk about for the quartz, for example. Some watches have a mecha quartz.
Yeah.
So all it is the exactly same movement of a quartz battery, but the mechanical aspect is done with actual mechanical pieces. So you get a flyback second hand.
Your Gakota was a mecha quartz, right? Was it not? No, well,
It was not.
you're not sure.
I haven't got a clue.
But that's
But it's
actually
really
another
pretty.
point.
That's the most important element. See, you talk about quartz and you say, well, okay, so sometimes you can pay a real ridiculous premium, and you think, well, actually, this is outrageous. I'm paying a lot of money for something that is relatively cheap to make. But actually, when you're talking about the cost of a watch, part of that cost of the watch is actually into the crystal, the glass, whether it's glass or sapphire crystal. Part of it is actually the materials and the way that the case is done. Part of it is the strap, and you can pay $200-300 for a really, really good strap. And so therefore there's lots of other constituent parts of a watch that actually add to its value. But there is, I think, a ceiling on Quartz watches. When you start to pay those really silly money, thinking, okay, they're an essential part of anyone's collection, but do I really want to pay £60,000?
What is your ceiling for a Quartz watch? Because for me, I think once you go from a grand above, I'm like,
Ooh,
I don't know if I can do it.
I'm
Or lower.
I'm lower than a grand, I think.
Yeah, but you get some stuff
that's-
like a Studio Underdog or whatever, which is higher priced, but I don't know.
They're manual ones.
No, they're
The manual ones.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but you get some nice ones. You get the Beluga, Space View and stuff. They're around half
I guess
grand.
the FP Jaune would be the only one that I
There's
would
a big
really-
debate on that.
I
People
would-
hate them, people love it.
Yeah, I
Marmite.
think
But it's Quartz.
I think it's 15,000.
Is it? I thought it was more.
I
I
think
think
it's-
30 grand or something.
30 would be crazy. But you do make a good point. It's how much of the watch that... Let's say you want to invest and buy a watch. Should you invest a lot of money on buying a quartz watch? Should you instead invest a lot of money on buying a mechanical watch? To me, the beauty of a quartz watch is that you don't really care what happens to it too much.
It's very low maintenance, which is the nice part.
It's low maintenance. If you lose it, it's not at the end of the world. They're really enjoyable to wear. Would it be a big investment to buy? I don't think so.
I think one of the interesting elements I found is that actually with real vintage watches, we're talking 30s, 40s, 50s. If you pick up one of those mechanical movements, you got to really service it. It's really expensive, and my experience, the timekeeping has really been pretty shoddy. And it's really difficult. You get a quartz from the same period, and you get that repaired, which I think you did in one of your when we had that really long wait. That wonderful, quartz watch. All of a sudden, you've got something that's really accurate. So for real sort of vintage watches, I think the quartz is quite a benefit because you've got you've got a little bit more confidence that you're going to get closer to.
With the simple quartz movements, yes, because you can replace them very easily. But things like his or a tuning fork movement, they are very expensive to replace because they are really complicated movements.
Did you had to get that repaired, right? Or
Yeah, something about the crown had to be.
Oh, just the ground? It wasn't
no, movement was perfectly fine. But I dread the moment if anything happens to this movement because it's going to cost me an arm and a leg.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yes, the day we have to start servicing all of our watches.
Is the day we stop collecting watches.
the day we're gonna go
when we
broke.
get to that 10-year mark, 15-year mark, we'll go, you know what, it
We're
wasn't
gonna
worth it,
cry.
actually.
It's going to be the end of the
And
world.
it all breaks down.
Fabulous. Guys, if you want to hear the end of the story about the Peckham High Street bank robbery, please set it down into the comments. Remember, like, subscribe. It's really important to keep this thing flourishing. Thank you so much, Elliot. Thank you, Max. A fabulous episode. See you again soon.
Bye-bye.